Okay, let's dive into this because today we are skipping the standard agenda. We're dropping right into the middle of literally one of the most audacious, high-stakes heists in human history. This isn't just your standard story about a battle. No, this is a sprawling drama about how a simple trading company managed to swallow an entire empire whole. It's a tale of shadows, unimaginable wealth, and the exact kind of backdoor diplomacy that completely redraws the map of the world forever.
I want the weight of this to really sink in. Historian Surendranath Sen hit the nail on the head when he said Plassey was won before it was fought. I mean, imagine hearing that with the intense, dramatic weight of a narrator right before the opening credits of your favorite anime roll. Because this legendary 1757 clash, it was absolutely not a triumphant military victory for the British. It was a completely calculated, cold-blooded setup. The swords hadn't even been drawn, the muskets hadn't even been loaded, and yet the fate of millions had already been signed away in secret.
Section 1. Eyes on Bengal's Wealth.
Now, to understand why this epic betrayal happened, we have to look at the prize itself. During the 18th century, under the later Mughals, Bengal was the glittering crown jewel of the subcontinent. If you could somehow tap into the calculating inner monologue of the British East India Company as they stared at this prize, it'd sound exactly like a mastermind plotting their ultimate move. You can just hear it. The French are breathing down our necks in the south. The Carnatic Wars are draining our coffers. But if we can just secure the vast resources and massive financial surplus of Bengal, we don't just survive, we dominate. Securing this ultimate geopolitical prize would give the British the exact edge they needed to crush the European rivals once and for all.
Let's move to Section 2, the seeds of conflict, and see how this builds.
Because, every great conflict needs an antagonist, and the young, defiant Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, was watching the British very, very closely. The East India Company wasn't just trading anymore. They were actively undermining the sovereignty, they were misusing their tax-free privileges, building unauthorized walls at Fort William, and harboring political fugitives right under the Nawab's nose, all while secretly colluding with his internal rivals. Channel Siraj-ud-Daulah's furious inner voice for a second here. They dare to build walls in my city without my permission? They drain my wealth and harbor my enemies? I am the Nawab. I will crush their insolence. And so, in 1756, his fury boils over, and he actually retaliates by seizing Fort William.
Now, this seizure leads directly to what the British dubbed the Black Hole Tragedy. The company claimed that British prisoners were thrown into a suffocating dungeon. But here is the crucial context we need. Historians have widely debunked this event as highly exaggerated, if not entirely fabricated. But honestly, the truth didn't really matter to the British. They weaponized the story. They used it as heavy propaganda to whip up a massive frenzy, deliberately placing this impossible set of demands on the Nawab, basically ensuring that a violent, total confrontation was absolutely inevitable.
Section 3. Clive's Web of Intrigue.
Enter Robert Clive. He wasn't just a military commander, he was a brilliant, utterly ruthless tactician. The conflict erupts in April 1756, and by June, Fort William falls to the Nawab. Now we reach early 1757. Picture Robert Clive staring at a map of Bengal, his cold, calculating inner voice just echoing in his mind. A frontal military assault against 50,000 men? That's suicide. But why fight the sword when you can simply buy the hand that wields it? Clive decides to take down the Nawab from the inside out, weaving this incredibly secret, treacherous alliance with the Nawab's most disgruntled nobles.
Clive's web caught the absolute most powerful men in Bengal. You've got Manik Chand, the officer in charge of Calcutta. You've got Jagat Seth, the ultra-rich banker who's providing the immense financial backing, and high-ranking military commanders like Rai Durlab. But the ultimate prize, right, the king piece on the board, is Mir Jafar, the commander-in-chief of the Nawab's army. Clive essentially bought his loyalty with the ultimate bribe, the absolute promise of the Nawab's throne itself.
Section 4. Betrayal at Plassey. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer absurdity of the numbers. On June 23, 1757, the two forces finally meet face-to-face in a mango grove in Plassey, about 30 kilometers south of Murshidabad. Siraj-ud-Daulah commands a massive, imposing force of 50,000 men. Meanwhile, the British East India Company stands there with a mere 3,000 men, just 950 Europeans and 2,100 Indian sepoys. On paper, these are utterly impossible odds. I mean, it should have been an absolute massacre. But as we know, the true battle wasn't going to be fought with swords. As the conflict begins, total chaos descends, but really not the kind you'd expect. A small group of the Nawab's loyal soldiers, led by the brave Mir Jafar, actually fight valiantly. But then tragedy strikes. Mir Jafar is killed in action. In that exact moment of panic, the traitor Mir Jafar steps right out of the shadows. He plays perfectly upon the young Nawab's fears, whispering deceit right into his ear, advising him to retire from the battlefield and just leave the command to his generals. The trick works flawlessly. Siraj retreats and the trap snaps shut. This was never a battle. It was a political coup masquerading as a military clash.
11. That is the number of hours this epic Battle of Plassey actually lasted. Just 11 hours. And why? Because as Siraj-ud-Daulah fled, Mir Jafar and Siraj-ud-Daulah, who commanded the vast majority of the Bengal army, literally just stood back. They crossed their arms and merely looked on as Robert Clive effortlessly routed the remaining, super-confused loyalist forces.
The casualties absolutely prove exactly what kind of engagement this was. 65 casualties on the British side, 500 on the Nawab side. For a clash involving over 50,000 soldiers, these shockingly low numbers prove this was effectively a non-battle. It was a business transaction, and the aftermath was swift and brutal. The fleeing Siraj-ud-Daulah was captured and tragically put to death by an assassin named Muhammad Ali Beg. The defiant Nawab was gone, the traitors had won. Section 5, Night of Eternal Gloom.
But the victory of the traitors was totally hollow. The immediate battle was over, sure, but the devastating, far-reaching aftermath of this singular act of betrayal was just beginning to choke the life out of Bengal. They called it the Plassey Revolution, but it was truly a subjugation. Mir Jafar got his throne, yeah, but he was instantly reduced to Clive's jackal. He was just a puppet. To ensure he stayed in line, 6,000 British troops were permanently stationed in Bengal, and real administrative power bypassed the throne and went straight to Mr. Watts, the British resident. The British emerged as the true, undisputed kingmakers, and Bengal's vast, legendary resources were placed completely at their disposal.
The economic impact of this shift was just catastrophic, literally described as a night of eternal gloom for India. The company used its newfound political muscle to completely ruin indigenous industry. They effectively forced the highly skilled cotton weavers of Bengal to buy raw materials from them and then sell the finished woven cloths exclusively back to them at arbitrary, dirt-cheap prices. Think about what that actually means. This was a private, profit-driven corporation systemically impoverishing a nation's working class just to amass unimaginable wealth for its foreign shareholders. So the crucial point is this: Plassey was fundamentally a conspiracy. It was actually somewhat limited in its immediate geopolitical impact, because remember, the Mughals were still the titular heads, the Marathas dominated central India, and the French were still super active. Plassey didn't establish direct British colonial rule over India, but through betrayal, banknotes, and backdoor diplomacy, it forced the door wide open. It created the perfect, highly lucrative sponsored state to fund the wars to come. Plassey essentially gave them the keys. Which leaves us with this final, really important thought. You can buy a commander, for sure, and you can install a puppet on a throne. But a sponsored state built entirely on greed and extortion, that is a powder keg waiting to go off. Eventually, the puppet begins to resent the master. Eventually, Mir Jafar and later his successor Mir Qasim would realize they had basically sold their souls to a monster they could no longer control. So what happens when those puppet strings inevitably snap? Well, that massive explosion is what leads directly to the monumental Battle of Buxar. But we'll have to explore that massive clash of empires in our next explainer.